On January 16, 1893, 162 U.S. Marines landed in a nation the world recognized as sovereign. By the next day, Hawaii's queen was forced to yield her throne. The official story claimed it was about progress, but profit-hungry businessmen led by Sanford Dole were desperate to save their sugar fortunes. How did pineapples, power, and an elite conspiracy trigger America's theft of a kingdom? The real story behind this coup is rarely told until now. In the decades before the coup, the Hawaiian kingdom stood as a recognized sovereign nation. The United States, Britain, and France all signed formal treaties with Hawaii by the early 1840s, acknowledging its independence and legitimacy on the world stage. Queen Liliuokalani took the throne in January 1891, inheriting not only the royal crown, but also a nation under growing pressure from foreign interests. She was determined to restore the rights of her people, proposing a new constitution that would return political power to native Hawaiians, power stripped away by the so-called Bayonet Constitution, forced on her predecessor by armed planters and their allies. But for the white planter elite, the real threat came from an entirely different direction. In 1890, Congress passed the McKinley Tariff, ending the special trade deal that had made Hawaiian sugar duty free in United States markets. Overnight, the profits of Hawaii's sugar barons, who controlled nearly all of the island's arable land, collapsed. Sugar, which made up nearly 90% of Hawaii's exports, now faced stiff competition from United States beet sugar. The numbers were stark. In just 2 years, sugar revenues dropped by as much as 40%. For the American and Euro-descended planters, this was not just a business slump. It was a direct threat to their fortunes and their grip on power. As Queen Liliuokalani pushed for reforms to restore native rights, the planter class saw their influence slipping away. Their economic empire, built on the backs of imported labor and protected by trade agreements, was now exposed. The Queen's vision for a more just and sovereign Hawaii collided head-on with the financial panic spreading through the ranks of the sugar elite. In the halls of Iolani Palace, the Queen pressed forward with dignity, but outside, anxiety and resentment festered among those with the most to lose. The ground beneath Hawaii's monarchy was shifting, not because of a popular uprising, but because a handful of powerful men faced a future where their profits and their privileges were no longer guaranteed. 13 men, gathered in secret, not in the name of freedom, but to protect their profits. The Committee of Safety, an alliance of sugar barons, lawyers, and businessmen, was a who's who of Honolulu's white elite. Henry E. Cooper chaired the group. Loren Thurston, the publisher and agitator, drafted their plan. Sanford B. Dole, a judge and son of missionaries, became their chosen frontman. Peter Cushman Jones, William O. Smith, and Henry Waterhouse rounded out the core. Not one native Hawaiian sat at their table. Their goal was clear: abolish the monarchy and force union with the United States, restoring the lucrative sugar trade. On January 16, 1893, as dusk settled over Honolulu, the plot moved from whispers to open action. U.S. Minister John L. Stevens, acting without orders from Washington, called for military intervention. At his request, Captain Wiltz of the USS Boston dispatched 162 armed Marines and sailors into the city. They marched ashore in full uniform, carrying rifles and 2 Gatling guns, and took up positions at Arion Hall, across from the government building and within sight of Iolani Palace. Detachments spread out to the U.S. consulate and other strategic points. The official excuse was to protect American lives and property, but the real message was unmistakable. The United States stood behind the conspirators. No shots were fired. The show of force alone was enough to paralyze resistance. Hawaiian citizens watched in disbelief as foreign troops occupied their capital. The Queen's Guards, outnumbered and outgunned, could only hold their posts and wait. The next day, January 17, 1893, the Committee of Safety read their proclamation from the steps of Aliolani Hale, declaring the monarchy abolished. Sanford Dole was installed as president of a provisional government. The kingdom was gone, swept aside by a handful of businessmen and the silent threat of American guns. Queen Liliuokalani did not surrender her nation in silence. Within hours of the coup, she drafted a formal protest addressed directly to the United States. She wrote these words: "I, Liliuokalani, do hereby solemnly protest against any and all acts done against myself. I yield to the superior force of the United States of America, whose minister has caused United States troops to be landed at Honolulu and declared that he would support the said provisional government." She made it clear this was not a surrender to the plotters, but a conditional yield to avoid bloodshed, trusting that justice would prevail in Washington. She had weapons and loyal guards at her disposal, but she refused to let her people pay the price for someone else's greed. Her plea did not vanish into a bureaucratic void. In July 1893, President Grover Cleveland's administration sent James Blount, a former congressman, to investigate. The Blount report, delivered that summer, left no room for doubt. It found that the United States Minister John Stevens had acted without authorization, landing troops not to protect Americans, but to back the coup. The report called the overthrow an illegal conspiracy, orchestrated by a handful of businessmen and enabled by American power. President Cleveland called the act a misuse of the power of the United States, and he labeled the events disgraceful. He demanded that the provisional government step aside and the Queen be restored to her throne. For a brief moment, the highest office in America agreed with the Queen. Her kingdom had been stolen, not liberated. But in Honolulu, the men who had seized power had no intention of giving it back. Sanford Dole and his allies held their ground and flatly rejected President Cleveland's demand to return power to Queen Liliuokalani. Instead, they declared the Republic of Hawaii in 1894, with Dole as president, and began lobbying for annexation on their own terms. Their patience paid off. In July 1898, while America's attention was fixed on the Spanish-American War, Congress passed a joint resolution to annex Hawaii. No referendum was held. Nearly every native Hawaiian opposed the move, but their voices were silenced as Washington claimed the islands for strategic advantage and commercial gain. Annexation reopened the door to duty-free trade, restoring the fortunes of the sugar elite. But a new crop was about to reshape the islands. In 1899, James Dole, Sanford's cousin, arrived in Honolulu and founded the Hawaiian Pineapple Company. The timing was perfect. With U.S. tariffs no longer a threat, Dole's company could flood the American market with cheap pineapple, just as sugar exports rebounded. By 1905, pineapples were bringing in millions of dollars a year, and the Dole name became synonymous with Hawaiian agriculture. The islands were transformed into vast corporate plantations run by a handful of white families and worked by thousands of imported laborers from Japan, China, the Philippines, and Portugal. These men, women, and children toiled long hours in harsh conditions, living in crowded camps and earning a fraction of what their bosses made. The cost of this prosperity fell heaviest on native Hawaiians. More than 90% of their land was lost to plantations and speculators. Generations grew up dispossessed, their language and culture suppressed by new rulers who claimed to bring civilization. In 1993, the U.S. government finally admitted the truth. President Clinton signed a formal apology, acknowledging that the overthrow was illegal and that native Hawaiians never consented to annexation. Yet the scars remain. Today, native Hawaiians are among the most impoverished in their own homeland, while the Dole Food Company stands as a global giant, its empire built on the theft of a nation. Hawaii's stolen crown still casts a long shadow. Native Hawaiians remain the most impoverished group in their own homeland, while the Dole Empire thrives. The true cost of profit-driven conquest isn't history, it's lived reality. Until justice matches apology, the story isn't finished. Share your thoughts below.